Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Roaring Twenties program, where we break down pivotal aspects of the 1920s for your viewing and listening pleasure. We're your hosts, Pranavi Galamudi and Ria Kripalani, and today we're covering one of our most requested topics yet, the flapper.
Alright, so there's a lot to cover. Just to sort of set the stage here, let's start with who exactly the flappers were. Flappers were predominantly young women during the 1920s who adopted this sort of free, energetic lifestyle. We can consider them America's first generation of independent women, considering how they pushed the barriers of economic, social, and political freedom for women across the nation.
The period prior to the 1920s was very suffocating for women as they faced so many restrictions. They had to dress modestly, which meant wearing full-length dresses, and had to maintain long hair and tie their hair back in a bun. On top of that, they were supposed to marry early and learn to be housewives, which consisted of taking care of kids and maintaining.
And many women before the 1920s didn't know their lives could be any different. But during World War I, a lot of women entered the workforce and realized their potential. They discovered that they could do more than just be housewives. And after World War I ended, many women did not want to give up their newfound freedom. They wanted to buy their own things and submit to the consumer culture Americans know and love. Additionally, women who were very rarely seen in the political world turned into activists. And thanks to Margaret Sanger, women gained greater access to contraceptives in the early 1920s. Women began to fight for their own rights as well. Then, in August of 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed for women's suffrage.
And at the same time, Henry Ford's mass production of cars began. Women who had recently joined the consumer culture bought their own cars and began to drive wherever they wanted. After America had ended the legal sale of alcohol, also known as Prohibition, secret bars popped up called speakeasies. Women who had gained so much more freedom now had a place to sing, dance, drink, and smoke. All these aspects led to a rebirth for women, and flappers emerged.
Yeah, and many women before the 1920s didn't know their lives could be any different. But during World War I, a lot of women entered the workforce and realized their potential. They discovered that they could do more than just be housewives. And after World War I ended, many women did not want to give up their newfound freedom.
Right. The stereotypical flapper was a stylish luxe party girl who smoked and drank in public and danced in jazz clubs. And as we mentioned before, the increased accessibility of birth control and contraception meant that the stereotypical flapper was also a woman who had sexual freedom. And of course, considering how reserved and conservative society had been in years past, this new idea of the independent, free flapper girl came as quite the shock to the previous generation, who still upheld very Victorian ideals.
Another aspect of the flapper that was in stark contrast to women from the past was their dressing sense. Flappers were notorious for wearing very garish, showy clothing. They did away with the corsets of generations past and instead adopted a looser, boxier, less form-fitting silhouette. They stopped wearing the long, full skirts and high necks of Victorian dresses because they were hard to manage. And, gasp, they wore shorter dresses that revealed their calves. How scandalous.
It definitely was scandalous at the time. Flappers also wore high heels and makeup and cut their hair into short bobs, basically breaking every fashion role and stereotype for women that existed at the time.
And guess what? Fashion trends weren't the only things flappers broke. They also destroyed every societal expectation of women's lifestyles. As we mentioned previously, they went to jazz clubs and nightclubs and smoked, drank, and danced in public. They openly flirted with men and even asked men out on dates. At the time, it was expected that men made the first move, but flappers turned that stereotype completely on its head.
Along with the prevalence of the flapper trend among young women, the flapper trend spilled over into industries like film and advertising. Companies took advantage of the flapper trend and began to market their products, such as makeup and jewelry, specifically towards flappers. Some companies even used imagery of flappers on their advertisements to cater to the flapper crowd.
And the influence of flappers went way past advertisements. Flappers were on the covers of famous magazines such as Vanity Fair and Life. Another mode of media that became really popular during the 1920s was films. Flappers were constantly depicted in films. More often than not, the image of the flapper that was portrayed in films was the exact stereotypical flapper that we discussed previously, which cemented the flapper stereotype.
Along with the media, there were select people who did a lot for the flapper movement and contributed to the public's reception of flappers. The first was, drum roll please, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Yup, that F. Scott Fitzgerald. The one who wrote The Great Gatsby. When he published his novel, This Side of Paradise, the press credited him as the creator of the flapper. Fitzgerald continued writing about flapper culture in short stories for the Saturday Evening Post, which made flappers more widely known. For the next decade, Fitzgerald would be known as the flapper expert.
And hey, guess who else was a major contributor to the flapper trend? It was none other than Zelda Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife. Now, Zelda was the epitome of the flapper. She had a lifestyle of partying and publicity after she married F. Scott Fitzgerald. Zelda was the inspiration for many of Fitzgerald's flapper characters, and she even wrote her own articles about the flapper lifestyle.
Our last major contributor to the flapper movement was Lois Long, another author whose subject matter focused predominantly on flappers. She herself was a flapper, and she based her writings on her real-life experiences with drinking, dancing, and partying all night. And get this, she usually wrote her stories in the wee hours of the morning after coming home from the clubs. What an icon.
Alright, let's move on to the next aspect of flappers we have to talk about, their opponents. Now, I know that we've been painting flappers as these sort of invincible, empowered women who threw every regressive stereotype out the window, but that's exactly what some people hated about them.
Let me just jump in here. Opponents of the flapper movement hated the newfound freedom of flappers, and they weren't ready to part with the ideals and values of the Victorian era.
Yes, exactly. In fact, there was a lot of legal action taken that tried to limit the freedoms of flappers. For example, Utah tried to pass laws on the lengths of women's skirts, and Virginia banned dresses that revealed too much of a woman's throat.
That these legalities extended way past regular everyday clothing. In fact, women who wore swimsuits thought to be inappropriate were made to leave the beach by police, and if they resisted, they were arrested.
Actually, there was a DC hostess named Mrs. John B. Henderson who attempted starting a movement against what she thought were vulgar flapper fashions, and clergymen like Rabbi Stephen S. Wise and Baptist pastor Dr. John Roach Stratton were notorious for vehemently ranting against flapper fashion.
On top of that, even some women's rights activists thought flappers went way too far in their freedoms and promiscuity. Regardless of their opponents, it's undeniable that flappers had a huge impact on the nation. Some of those impacts we are still feeling today.
Although flappers did show and make use of many freedoms, women weren't truly free and equal until much after the 1920s. Flappers did pave the way for future generations to benefit from the social changes flappers and women in the 1920s attempted to set into motion. Flappers also changed the way society viewed women.
Companies actually created advertisements that specifically targeted women because more women were financially independent and played a much larger role in consumer culture. Women were viewed as independent and reliable workers, and this also helped lay the foundation for gender equality in the workplace. More and more women sought higher education and became doctors, lawyers, and even engineers. Flappers broke many glass ceilings and helped expand many freedoms for women.
There were also many changes in family life. Birth control gave women more control over how many children they would have, and women were able to make their own decisions regarding pregnancy. There was also an increased sense of companionship in marriages, although not equality just yet. For the first time, women were able to pursue their own dreams and weren't confined to being a housewife and
Exactly. Flappers pretty much changed how women were treated and perceived in America. They were dependable workers who didn't need a man to live and have fun, and women realized that they no longer had to be married off young and work as housewives. Without the help of flappers, who knows how much longer it would have taken for women to gain more rights and freedoms. Thank you.